Howdy. So today we're going to discuss brandy and what that exactly means, technically and legally. But to start off, I'd like to give you a little quote from Samuel Johnson. Claret is the liquor for boys. Claret is red wine. Port is for men. Port is, of course, fortified, sweet dessert wine from Portugal. But he who aspires to be a hero must drink brandy. And brandy, of course, comes from France. It's a distilled grape-based spirit, the best of which comes from cognac, C-O-G-N-A-C. And I'll discuss all of these things and how they came to be. I'm going to discuss a whole range of distilled grape products, from the clear grappa, which is made from spent grape skins, to eau de vie, which is made from grapes or sometimes even fruit, to the aged spirits like cognac or even armagnac. Now, as mentioned last time, our English word brandy, comes from, not from French though, comes from Dutch. Brandewijn means burnt wine, literally, meaning that you fire the wine up and you take the distilled part off, and the fact that we use a Dutch word is actually very interesting. Even though we're going to focus on the industry in France today, we'll see the Dutch actually had a big part in starting that. But let's start with the simplest of all these spirits. This is grape eau de vie, or water of life. That's all that means in French. It's basically just distilled wine. It's unaged, it's bottled, so it's clear, and presumably it still tastes like whatever fruit it came from. It's actually very hard to find nowadays because most distilling processes in modern times basically strip every single ounce of flavor and character and everything out of the distilled base, along with all the flavor, of course. So it's so that when the French actually do try to market eau de vie, the assumption is that most people in the world outside of France won't know what that means. So strangely enough, they actually market it as vodka. I know that seems really weird, but that's basically what vodka is, and vodka can be made from anything. So if you go into the store and you see a brand like Sirac, which is comes from France, marketed as vodka, it's made of grapes. It's actually eau de vie. It's not vodka at all. And I guess it's a very sensible way to get rid of grapes. When the price is very low, you make a really crappy wine out of it, and then you distill it, and you've got something you can sell on the market as vodka, which is really kind of smart if you think about it. But in any case, the next kind of brandy, what does technically qualify, is called pomace brandy. This is made from the skins, the seeds that are left over after you've pressed the juice for wine. You've got this stuff that's the base. It's already fermented. I mean, you've got, still yeast and stuff in there, and it still has the ability to, the skins and the tannins and everything still has a lot of flavor in it. And what normally happens if you're making wine is, if you're making a dark red wine, you'll leave it on the skins, what's called the lees, and the seeds, to extract all the color and the tannin and lots of the flavor. If you're making a rosé, you leave it on briefly for maybe a couple of days to a week, and then you get a light color. But you can actually make white wine from red grapes. Surprisingly enough, you can just take the skins off immediately or very quickly, which would give you something like, pink zin is made that way actually. It's, just left in to leave a little hint of pinkness, and then the skins are thrown away, but it's a very dark red grape that it's made from, weirdly enough. So what do you do with all these skins? That's the real question. You add water to the skin, and the fermentation starts again, or it starts anew, and you get maybe 5% alcohol out of this. It's kind of sour, piquant. In fact, it's called piquette in France. It's called acquarello in Italian, and it can be drunk. It's quite pleasant. It doesn't last more than a couple of weeks, and so it makes sense just to kind of get the alcohol content out of that and sell it as another product that it can be quite expensive. So in France, what this product is called is a marc, M-A-R-C. So you have a Marc de Loire, a Marc Bourgogne, or something like that. In Italian, which is the more familiar form of it, it is called grappa, okay, which of course comes from the word grape. And there are some very, very interesting things people are doing now. Grappa can actually be very, very expensive, especially if you go to Italy, you find it in these beautifully hand-blown bottles of glass. But it's But what they're beginning to make now is single variety types of grappa that are sometimes made from the skins, but sometimes they're actually just made from wine. So you'll find a really decent wine, a Chianti or a Brunello di Montalcino or something like that, and they will often make a distilled spirit out of it and only distill it once, so it has that beautiful flavor of the grapes. And when it's done well, it's really remarkable. It's not like it doesn't taste like just alcohol, which is, if you really distill it thoroughly, that's what you get. And as I said, these can be very, very expensive. So there are also, I should say, versions of distilled grape clear brandy around the world. Iranian Arag, which I'm not even sure if that's even made anymore since the Iranian Revolution. But it's the equivalent of arak, which you find in Lebanon and Turkey and places like that, or Spanish orujo, which I think the word actually comes from Farsi. So it's orujo is cognate with raki. In Georgia, the country, not the state, chacha, in Portuguese, bagaceira, in Greek, tsipuro, in Hungary, it's torkolipalinka. In Bulgarian, it's rakia. So all these they're similar forms of this all through the Middle East and the Balkans and through much of the Mediterranean. There's a kind of grape distillate, which is clear, relatively flavorless, but it's done well, it will taste like the grapes that it came from. And modern grappa is a very, very different product, though. It is made, apparently nowadays, they just take the skins and the seeds. They don't actually even add water to it. They just take that stuff and they put it over direct heat and in a bain-marie, or just like a kind of steam bath. And it's kind of pressure distilled, so they can actually get liquid out of it at the end, which is really strange. I'm not sure how this whole process works, but in the past it was just you add water, you make acquarello, and then you distill that. So the quintessential form of brandy is not a clear spirit. It is aged brown. Again, this is the oak. We don't think of oak as being so important in all these spirits, but it absolutely is. And this is cognac. Okay, Winston Churchill said that cognac is like a good woman. Do not assault it, coddle it, and warm it in your hands before you sip. So here's the thing to clarify what this word cognac means. Cognac is a form of brandy, so all cognac is brandy. Not all brandy is cognac, of course. Okay? So where this word comes from, Cognac is a city in the southwest of France. It's on the River Charente. It's the north of Bordeaux. And it is the center of a region of the production of cognac. And what's interesting about it is it grows grapes that are not actually that good. The grapes that are used are called Ugni Blanc, Ugni Blanc, and a few others. Basically, they make out of this a kind of white wine that is very thin, very acidic. It's kind of just nasty white wine. And what's really weird is before, I'll talk about the phylloxera epidemic. There was an epidemic in the late 19th century in France of the grape varieties that wiped everything out. So before, they used to use a Folle Blanche, which is another grape also really very acidic and bad. Now the point is that it makes bad wine, it makes great cognac. Okay, so something changes, that acidity comes out of it. And the reason, of course, that they never, they decided to stop wine production is that the Bordeaux nearby and other great wine regions in the area, there was no reason for them to compete with wine. They should make a different product that could sell on its own. So the acidity is actually essential to keeping the aroma of the grape as it goes through the distilling process. If you have a wine that doesn't have a whole lot of acidity, you have a really uninteresting cognac at the end. This way you have a really, really aromatic one because of the type of grape and what goes into it, what's in it, or naturally. So cognac production is, of course, seasonal, right? Because they've got grapes that they've got to make this whole thing out of. It begins in October, so there's a kind of, right now, it actually, frenzy of activity, much like there is in wineries, right? They're picking stuff, the whole harvest has to come in, they need tons of vats to ferment all this stuff, and again, this is what makes cognac very different from beer or whiskey. You can dry, you can store, But the unique thing about cognac, though, and what makes it so special and actually volatile, is that the grapes are pressed, they're left out for a few weeks to capture wild yeasts, exactly like the way we did our experiment with wine. And the final wine, if you can even call it that, actually doesn't have that much alcohol in it. It's only 8%, and that's about average. If you're using a wild yeast, you get 8 to 10%. It's less than, of course, using commercial yeast. What is different also is that in wine you will add sulfur to the whole thing to stop the fermentation process. Here you don't do that. You actually just let it go, and you are not allowed. Now I know this is going to surprise and shock many of you, but in wine production, if you want to get the alcohol a little higher, you can do something called chaptalization. Okay? It's Chaptalization. Chaptalization. That's adding sugar to the wine, and the sugar, of course, will convert to more alcohol, so you can get higher percentage. Above 12, you can get up to 14, sometimes even 16. So to make cognac, chaptalization is forbidden. So they're really only going to distill that 8%, which means that the alcohol, the flavor of it, is all going to come from grape, wildly fermented, not from sugar. Okay, that makes a big difference. I know this is getting a little technical, but it's important. They distill this low alcohol wine twice. The first one is called the Brouilly, which is about 30% alcohol. The second is called the Bon Chauffe. Not so important, but and of that second distillation, they discard the beginning of the fermentation process and the end, the heads and the tails. Are thrown away, and they use only the middle section, the middle time that you're fermenting, which is called the heart. Okay, they use an alembic still. Okay, in other words, they still do use one, and it's called a still. No pun intended. It's called an alembic Charente, and Charente is the Charente is the river that flows through there. It's a pot still, so it's not a continuous still. You have to do it in batches. And what you get out of this to start with is a clear spirit, about 70% alcohol, that still has a lot of fruit flavor and aroma and so on. It then goes into an oak cask, which comes from Limousin, like a limousine, right? It's the forests that are nearby in the central part of France, and those oaks have to be over 100 years old, so they have really tight structure to them, really, really heavy wood. If you've ever held a piece of oak, it's really, really solid. And the brandy goes in there, and it ages for at least 2 years. That's the cheaper stuff, but usually a lot longer. Okay, so remember, imagine what's happening is this alcohol, remember, seeps into the wood. It draws the vanillin and lots of other aromatic compounds and color out of the toasted barrel, and the angel share soaks through. So some of this alcohol actually evaporates on the outside of the barrel, and so the concentration of alcohol actually diminishes. Now this is what's interesting, is that if you're making alcohol in a large batch, in the end you're going to have to water it down, right? Because it's going to be above 40%, 40 percent alcohol, so that you want to water it down to get it to that standard, sort of. So the diminishing of the alcohol through evaporation is a much better way to do it than watering it down, because you're not adding nothing. There's no flavor at all in water, obviously. And then they also usually transfer it to a new barrel, which gives it a kind of fresh, resiny spiciness. That in the last, and then as it ages, they move it into progressively older barrels. Each one gives it its own kind of set of flavors and aromas and everything, okay? These then go into an underground cellar, what's called a chais, C-H-A-I-S, which has a constant low temperature. It's about 55 degrees, so it's underground. That's, cellars always have a constant temperature, but very high humidity. They have their own unique microflora, bacteria, molds, other creatures that live in this cave, of course, that indirectly add flavor to the cognac in much the same way that they do to cheese or whatever is, you can age in a cellar. Charcuterie, which means, sausages and hams and things that they put in a cellar, will pick up the flavors of the mold and bacteria, and sometimes they're very useful. On a salami, for example, that white mold you see on the outside, that's protects it from what they call case hardening. So it's a, so by chance, really, people started putting things in their cellars to protect them, and eventually figured out that the temperature is perfect for bacterial growth, and and it aids in cheese and sausages and things, but it's really essential for cognac too, oddly enough. Okay, so the most important of these is called Baudonia compagnacensis. Okay, Baudonia. It's a black sac-shaped fungus that loves alcohol-saturated air. So the alcohol's in the air in this cave, and this stuff eats it up. And it's the exact same stuff that's on the rick houses in Kentucky that I mentioned last time. So the vast majority of producers then take the cognac into a glass storage vessel, and they label it by the year. So what they're doing is they're going to blend it year to year to get a very consistent product. And this is a person who works for them. He's the maître duché, but he's referred to as the nose. Okay, he's the person who will smell all these different years and blends the cognac. That is an absolute masterful position. And in fact, he will have his nose insured for millions of dollars just in case something goes wrong. So as should be apparent, this is a process that has not changed in several hundred years, right? There's nothing modern about it at all, The caves are not they're naturally temperature controlled. The yeast is natural. The alembic is medieval. Okay, so it's obvious that the things that have necessarily mechanized the harvest, of course, and the production and things like that, but they're still wild yeast and still the old stills. And they figured as long as we've got it perfect, let us make a law saying we can't mess with it at this point. So there's a system of grading cognac, and this was introduced in the late 19th century. It's a little arcane, so let me explain this, because I want you to know, well, for the rest of your lives, if you go into a place and want to buy good cognac, it is as good as any alcohol gets. It's perfection, okay? I want you to understand what these letters mean. So you will see on a letter, the letters VS on some bottles. That stands for, and notice this is in English, strangely enough, for a good reason. It stands for very special, okay? Now that is a wishful thinking, because it is not very special, okay? It's the lowest rung. It's the least interesting, it's the cheapest, it's the youngest cognac. The blend is aged in a barrel for 2 years. So it's got the least flavor of all the stuff, okay? The next rung up is called VSOP, which means very special old pale. It's the youngest cognac in there, and it will include older years too, but the youngest in there is 4 years old. Okay, so this is middle of the road, not terribly expensive, but it's it's okay for drinking cognac, But the one that's really wonderful is called XO, which means extra old. Okay, so this is the real age stuff. The youngest stuff in the bottle will be 6 years, though this, in the year 2016, is just changed so that it has to be 10 years. 10 is the minimum of anything that can go into it. Okay, so you can't put 4-year-old and blend it. It's got to be 10 years now, just as of this year. Now, on the average, the stuff that goes in there is about 20 years old. Okay, so which means that there's some that's 40 or 60 years old, a little bit for super raisiny flavor. There's some that's 20. There's some that's 10, and they blend it up to make something that's fairly consistent, but of an astounding complexity. The point is not to make it absolutely exactly the same every year. It's to make the best that can possibly be made. And I have to say, every brand is just slightly different. Some have a little more floral overtones and like flowers, right? Some are a little more fruity. Some have intense caramel and vanilla flavors. Some really taste like dried apricot or rose, which is really amazing stuff. Some are kind of leathery, which I know that doesn't sound very appealing to be chewing on leather, but they have this kind of flavor that's, I don't know how to describe it other than like good baseball glove or leather couch, you know. Some definitely smell a little like tobacco, has that kind of woody smell, which of course comes from the barrel, right? And I'm not being facetious about these terms at all. You know, I think a lot of the terms they use to describe wine are just complete nonsense. But here, this is really there. And oddly, the grading system doesn't just apply to French champagne, French cognac. It applies to U.S. makers also. They also label VS, VSOP. It's kind of meaningless in this country. It's kind of a marketing ploy. They take sometimes, in fact, the exact same product and they'll add a little more caramel coloring and then they'll call it VSOP instead of VS. So if you're buying like, you know, Corbel or Christian Brothers or Paul Masson, I don't know, whatever the brands are, those labelings designate price. They don't really mean much about, you know, there's not 20-year-old cognac going into those. Now there's other weird things you might see on a cognac label. Okay, we'll look at some of them in class, but there are labels like Vieux, Vieux, which means old, Vieille Réserve, which means reserved old, hors d'âge, which means beyond all age, and all of these designate that the cognac is actually a little older than you would get normally. And what is interesting is that at a certain point, the oak actually stops adding flavor, and it makes it slightly worse. So 40 or 50 years is about the upper limit. And then once you put it in the bottle, of course, it stops aging completely, but you'll sell it. And some houses, like Remy Martin, for example, have a Louis XIII cognac that has several dozen years perhaps blended, but it's between 40 and 100-year-old cognac that goes in there. And if you are interested, the last time I looked carefully, the bottle that's sitting there at our local Bevmo is $2,500 for a bottle of cognac. Okay, so that's pretty expensive. Remy's Black Pearl is a little more expensive. It's in a hand-blown Baccarat crystal vase. There exist only 358 bottles in the world. That sells for, again, this is a few years ago, it's probably more expensive now. It sold for 20,000 euros, which is about $25,000 a bottle, which is about $1,000 a glass, maybe $250 a sip. It's a lot of money. I mean, you have to, you know, however good alcohol gets, that's just nuts. And this is, now remember, this is not something that's going to appreciate in age. It's not like wine where it's going to get better as it ages. It's in the bottle, it's stopped. This is what it's intended to be bought and drunk at this age, which is amazing. Now, the other very interesting thing about cognac is the geographical origin, or cru, C-R-U, a word we will come back to, so please remember this word. That can also be on the label. The crus were defined in 1909, so you may see, for example, the word Grande Champagne on your cognac. It doesn't has nothing to do with the region where the champagne comes from, bubbly stuff. It doesn't mean it's made from champagne at all. It has nothing to do with that. It means that this is, Champagne means flat countryside. So this is the land right south of the city, which of Cognac, which has a high percentage of chalk in the soil. The chalk helps retain moisture, which makes it very different from clay. So it gives the wine a kind of minerally or gravelly flavor. And I know this sounds kind of strange, but you know when the rain first hits the cement, you get this kind of interesting aroma of the acid, you know, whatever they put into the cement is lime or something like that. But that flavor you often find in wines. You can find it in this wine that's just south of the city. Petite Champagne, which means smaller countryside, wraps around that to the south, and it's considered slightly inferior. It's not quite as good. And then there are what are called the Borderies to the north, which are said to give cognac a nutty flavor. And if you want to see an example of that, Martel, which is a very good example. That was founded in 1715, by the way. And then there are concentric rings of what's called fin bois, bon bois, bois ordinaire. These are the woods that extend around the periphery of this whole region, and then it extends all the way to the seacoast, actually. And each region is said to contribute a unique flavor, and of course, what this is reflecting the terroir. Remember that word, okay? Which means the unique flavor of the soil, the climate, the human interaction. And so many houses actually will mix not just different years, but different regions around cognac will go into the bottle to give it a little minerality, a little fruitiness, a little nuttiness, whatever. Okay. It was not until 1939 that cognac received what is called an appellation contrôlée, or appellation d'origine contrôlée, which means the name of the origin is controlled, which means that word cannot be used on the bottle unless it actually comes from this particular area. Cognac can only become from this area, okay? And it's been a very big deal in international trade, and in fact, one of the precedent-setting cases. There are hundreds of cognac houses, but the ones that you're likely to see here are the four big ones. There are four enormous cognac houses that you can find in the U.S. They're Hennessy's, one of the biggest and oldest, Remy Martin, Courvoisier, and Martel. And that's actually the order that they descend in. You might say quality, but also in sales. And these four big houses account for about 4/5 of all the cognac made today. So they're super powerhouses, and of course they're connected to bigger alcohol conglomerates. We'll talk about that down the road. But Remy Martin, that's pretty standard, excellent cognac. The XO, which is the best one, it's in a little pilgrim bottle shape. It's round like that. That goes for about $150, a little more, maybe now. Hennessy has a signature bottle that looks like a bell, and that's about $230 now for the XO. And sometimes you'll see also Hein or Hardy or Camus. Those are also decent labels in the same price range, the same relatively. So obviously what we're dealing with here is a drink that is ridiculously expensive. And it's actually the first form of alcohol, if you want to think of it that way. Apart from aged wine, it's, the first form of distilled alcohol, and its reputation is largely pegged to its cost, right? I mean, it's an expensive thing. And I have to tell you, let me tell you the truth about this, is by strange circumstance, when I was very young, my father, who didn't actually drink at all, we used to get presents from contractors and things, and quite often consisted of a bottle like this, which was back then $75, $100, so it was a nice Christmas present from people. They went in the closet. They stayed there for years, in fact, until I got to high school, and me and my friends used to have a party, and we'd break out a bottle of, Hennessy. so I have to say, I was really spoiled when I was younger. I drank extraordinarily good cognac. I never drink it anymore. There's no way on earth I'm going to spend $230 on a bottle of cognac. Just won't do it. On principle, I will drink cheap brandy once in a blue moon, but the fact is, cheap brandy is really bad. That's just no point about it. Great brandy is as great as it gets. So I think if I'm thinking, what do I really want to drink, I go for something that's very good and affordable. Bourbon is the closest I can come to. It's comparable. It's sweet in the same way. But in any case, surprisingly, the largest importer of cognac in the world had long been the U.S., 42% a decade or so ago, compared to 40% stayed in Europe, which is really kind of surprising. We import most of it. So cognac sales actually tripled between 1993 and 2003, from 16 million bottles to 49. And in 2011, the total export was 163 million bottles. So the latest figures I could find, the largest consumers now, not the United States anymore. We slipped. It's now China. China consumes more. And I find it fascinating that if you go into an Asian grocery store, like even the ones in Stockton, you'll find good cognac behind the counter on sale, because it's one of those things that are expensive, and of course denote class. But so you get a sense of the market share. I want you to recognize also that cognac forms only 2% of the entire global market share of distilled spirits. That's tiny little percent. Um, and the figures that I could find, which I think are a little old now, but in any case, that 2% compares to, well, let me give you an idea: 110 million bottles of cognac compared to 980 million of whiskey, and about 100, sorry, 1,000 million. What's that make? A billion of vodka. So vodka's much more prevalent, of course, because people mix it, and it's characterless. So let me give you a little history, because I know I've just been describing the spirit itself. So the first recorded sale of brandy is 1517, when a barrique d'eau d'ardente, that means a big barrel of ardent waters, was shipped from Bordeaux. And this was probably a clear spirit from Armagnac, but the reason that people point to this one is it's not medicine. It's not made on a small scale in an apothecary shop. That's a large volume. And by the mid 16th century, La Rochelle, which is the port where this cognac would have gone out, is recorded also. That becomes the major port for the Charente region. The river flows out into La Rochelle. The county just to the interior, Charente, is historically very important also. Where it's situated is important. It's very rich in salt, so there'd been this trade in salt to the north. So this sort of the trade routes, the pattern of bringing goods back and forth from the Charente to Paris and to the north had been there. The infrastructure had been there since the Middle Ages, basically, because everyone needs salt, right? To cure meat and wine and seasoned, not wine, serve fish and seasoned food. You understand what I mean. And so there was this big, brisk trade. And of all sort of coincidences, the king, and right at this time that we're talking, early 16th century, Francis I was born in Cognac in 1492, and so he kind of wanted to give a favor to his home city, so he exempted it from taxes, which is amazing, a tax exempt zone. So the city kind of underwent this incredible boom in the early 16th century. The city walls were built up, a palace goes in, and of course these circumstances fostered the growth of a kind of entrepreneurial middle class who served as the go-betweens between the grape growers outside the city and the tradesmen inside. So remember, it's separate people doing the growing, the distilling, the trading, okay? But there are these investors as middlemen in between all of these. So my point is really, there's a lot of wealth floating around for investment. And I think this is why the region shifts completely from wine production to brandy, because brandy, of course, you can ship. It's more concentrated. It's worth a lot more per barrel. And if you look at the regions to the south, Bordeaux sticks to wine. The Loire to the north, they stick to. They do export wine, of course. They always have been, but cognac kind of cuts out this interesting little niche for itself in between these two wine regions, because they grow bad wine, they make great cognac, and that's how it happens. And there's also, incidentally, the woodland is right to the east, so they have oak for the barrels there. And the other reason the woods are very important, think about this for a second. You have to burn wood to run your stills, right? This is why, the distillers in the backwoods of Kentucky and Tennessee did it, because they have woods there. You need to burn them. And of course, you need to make the barrels too. So woods are important. And then the advantage commercially, I think this is maybe even more important than the other factors, is that if you have a barrel of brandy, you can sit on it, right? You can wait. You can wait till the prices go high. If there are low prices one year, unlike wine growers, you don't have to sell that year at a lower price. You can just sit on it, age it longer, wait, when the prices go up, then sell. So that if, say, there is a crop failure in Britain, or the grape harvest is poor around Paris, you wait and then you sell there. So it's a volatile market. And what I mean by that is that people can make fortunes very quickly. And this of course, in that kind of situation, what always happens is outside investors notice and they come in, right? They say, they're not going to try and come into a market where every year your vintage wine is going to be better or worse. You have no idea how much volume you're going to have, what the price will be. But for distilled spirits, you can let them sit around a while. You can wait till the prices go up. So investors are very happy about that. They know they're going to make a profit. Um, Another unique feature of this area, and especially the port that I'm talking about, is La Rochelle, is that it is, and this may be just coincidence, but I don't know. Let's think about this. It is a hotbed of Protestantism, what in French are called the Huguenots, Huguenot. Huguenot. They're Calvinists, right? Remember, Jean Calvin was actually French. Um, and this could be a disadvantage at times, of course, because there were wars of religion in the 16th century that wrecked France in the second half of the century. But it could also be a real boom. When Henry IV, the Protestant general, won those wars of religion, he surprised everyone. Actually, bizarrely, he converted to Catholicism because he said, "I can't run this country if I'm Protestant." And he said, "Paris is worth a mass." But in any case, he signed an edict of toleration, basically to prevent further bloodshed. This is called the Edict of Nantes, which allowed the Protestants to worship in peace. And La Rochelle was a major, major Protestant city. So this was 1598. Okay, and the timing is very important here. I'm giving you these dates so you understand. This causes a boom, another boom for cognac itself. Okay, because remember, La Rochelle is the place where everything is shipped out. And the coincidence here, it's not just coincidence, is that the Dutch, remember, who are also Calvinists, right? They're the same religion, same Protestant religion as these French Huguenots, are the ones who have the distillation technology. Remember, they've perfected this. They start to carry cognac, and they start to invest heavily in the area, not just buying up land, buying up houses, buying distilleries. And this is why the word brandy comes from Dutch. It's because the Dutch were the ones who sold it everywhere. Remember that brilliant scheme of theirs that, if they carry goods for other people but don't drink it themselves, they will make a fortune. So they set up extensive stills in that area, and distillation was their solution to how you get alcohol shipped very far places without it spoiling. Wine spoils. Of course, if they're carrying goods into the Baltic all the way to St. Petersburg in Russia, or Novgorod even, they don't want it to, wine is going to spoil if it takes a year to get there, and it's on a ship and it's sloshing back and forth and the temperature changes. Cognac is not going to do anything. It's going to stay perfectly fine in a barrel. So there is well, let me give you an example just of one of these. So there's a record of an agreement dating to 1624 in which two Dutchmen who were living in France set up an industrial scale still in Charente. And it's important to know the whole process. Remember, it's copper. The Dutch are importing the copper from Sweden. Remember that connection to the Baltic? They have the technical know-how. So this is very important. It's why the French didn't do it themselves. In 1643, a guy named Philippe Augier, the most important cognac merchant of that day, married into a Dutch family that was made a fortune making paper, actually. And there seems to have been, after this, a whole sort of slew of Dutch people start coming in and investing in the area. So it's more than just shipping. They want to produce the stuff as well. So for much of the 17th century, there is a flourishing French-Dutch cooperation. And who's buying this stuff? The English. Okay? Remember, this is before the gin craze. This is before anything. Brandy is the popular one before the gin comes in. They're also selling it to Germany. They're selling it in Hamburg. They're selling it in Scandinavia. So if you are in Stockholm or Helsinki or someplace like that, brandy is going to be the elite drink, and the Dutch will sell it to you. So from the very start, cognac is an export good. More than anything, it's sold abroad. In fact, it may be the first of these that really, succeeds global, at least on a large scale. This is also the era of Louis XIV, right? So early in the 17th century, late 17th century, his finance minister, his name was Colbert, again following good mercantilist theory, decided that the nation should promote industry and trade, because this would of course make tax revenue for him so he can fight wars, but it would also trickle through the whole country. So this is this whole flurry of activity in this era. especially shipbuilding. Shipbuilding is one of those things that their new navy yards are built at the mouth of the Charente, at what's called Rochefort. New forests are planted in Limousin to provide the timber, and of course the interesting thing, the descendants of those trees are still being used for barrels to make cognac. So the basic idea, why the government sponsors all this, is that the more exports they have, the more money will flow into the nation. Other people are buying it with their gold and silver. That gold and silver is coming to us. The more tax money the crown will have, and the more it will be able to wage war. Right? That's plain and simple. I know it sounds ridiculous, but true. For Louis XIV, this was a kind of, it was about territorial conquest for him. It was about overseas expansion, and ironically, he's actually fighting against the Dutch for much of this time, which seems really weird. But I want you to think also that the French were now really into colonial projects. They actively promoted Quebec as a French colony. Remember, Canada, the eastern part of Canada, is French to start. They actively promoted Louisiana. Remember, who's it named for? Louis XIV, right? And the Caribbean colonies. Don't forget Guadeloupe, Martinique. And in this era, what amounts to, let's say, a kind of advertisement for cognac brandy that's sold by the name, the advertisements start appearing in the London Gazette of 1678. So again, keep in mind what I said last time about newspapers. Advertising is just in its infancy, along with gazettes, there's newspapers like this. And then remember also that Louis XIV, this is a strange part of the story. Remember the Sun King, this is who I'm talking about, was a monarch who believed that he should have absolute control over all of his subjects. This is a political theory called absolutism, supported by the theories of Jean Baudin, but there's basically implemented this whole idea that there should be no representative government, there should be no états généraux, which is the sort of the parliament of France, stops meeting. And what Louis decides is not only should we have one administrative system for the whole nation that's centered on the king, l'état c'est moi, the state is me, but that uniformity of religion is necessary for political uniformity. So in 1685, he revoked the Edict of Nantes, okay, Nantes, just the place where it was signed, which means there's no such thing as religious freedom in France anymore. And the Protestants, in many cases the most industrious people in the nation, left France. They went largely to England, because remember, England is also by and large Calvinist in this era. They went to Holland, where they had co-religionists as Calvinists. They also went to New York, and actually if you go just above the city of New York, there's a town called New Rochelle, named after La Rochelle. There's also New Paltz is another Huguenot enclave. And also they went to New England, where there, of course, are Puritans in Massachusetts Bay Colony are also Calvinists, okay? One person who you probably know who's descended from these Huguenots is Paul Revere, right? Revere, that's a French name. Okay, so these people formed what people have sometimes described as a Huguenot mafia. They controlled a lot of overseas trade. They lent money to each other. They did some dirty business, but and some actually remained in France and actually converted to Catholicism nominally, or at least people say that they were practicing in secret. So a family like this is the Martels. They were Protestant. They converted to Catholicism so they could stay and keep their company. But what this meant, most importantly, the revocation meant that the Dutch influence is over, right? The Dutch get out of those business opportunities, and by the early 18th century, the French start buying up their businesses when they disappeared, and French-owned businesses also start popping up, consciously promoting the image of cognac as being exclusive and elite, and it works really, really well if you think of the timing. Take, for example, their biggest buyers, okay, the biggest consumers of this were the English. In 1675, they were importing 1 million gallons. by 1689, it was double that amount. So within a decade, double the consumption. And unlike the craze for Dutch gin, brandy was always expensive. There's not a cheap knockoff. You can't make a knockoff of this, okay? Because it's got a completely unique flavor. If you try and add, caramel food coloring to grain neutral based spirits, you can have something really disgusting, okay? Remember, the grapes don't grow in England anymore, so they can't do it themselves there. It's not like gin can be made in England, right? Cognac can only be made in France. It has to be imported. And in the 18th century, I think that's why it becomes the really elitist drink. The most expensive, the most highly regarded of all forms of alcohol, and it really still is to this day. So 7,000 barrels were shipped annually in the early 1700s. By 1727, it was 27,000 barrels. In 1780, it was 50,000. In 1791, it was 87,000. So the imports of brandy rise 12-fold in the course of the century, and that's. The wars make no difference. People, I guess, still import them. I guess when England gets in wars with France, as it does all through the 18th century, smugglers seem to have figured out ways to get it in anyway. And it's believed that actually most French goods that go to England, of course they do, consumable goods get there through smuggling, because they're officially banned during the war, but somehow they show up anyway. So let's talk about the most important of these houses that are founded in this French-based boom period. The important one is 1724 is Remy Martin. Okay? It became the favorite of Louis XV. This is Louis XIV's son, of course. And in the course of the 1720s, practically every vineyard in the whole region switches to the Folle Blanche grape that's used exclusively for cognac, and wine production disappears throughout the whole region. Aging in oak also becomes standard here, and you'll probably also notice something else strange about this time, about the names of the houses that are founded. There's some that are very un-French sounding, even among the producers today. Think of Hennessy. That's not a French name. It was an Irishman. Richard Hennessy, serving in the brigade as a brigade captain in the service of Louis XV. When he retired, he founded the company, 1765. So strangely, there's a big influx of Irishmen into the cognac business in the 1760s. Sorry, why? They're Catholic. They're allowed to come, unlike the Dutch. Okay. And like any boom industry, one person makes a fortune at it, and then others say, oh, good, let's invest, let's rush in. I think something else that boosts the cognac industry in the 18th century is the predominance of a new economic theory. Okay, now this is one that actually comes before full-blown capitalism, but it looks like it in many respects. So let me talk about these people. They are called the physiocrats. Okay, it's just physicists, like physics, but physio and crat means a rule, which means the rule. Physis means nature, the rule of nature. Okay, I want you to remember that. And unlike the earlier economic theorists, the mercantilists who believed that profit was gained by trading, by taking goods one place, selling them someplace else, and in fact, the governments working under mercantile theory, remember, tried to control the economy in all sorts of ways. They fixed prices, they fixed the price of labor, but through guilds and things like that. They tried to influence purchasing patterns by granting monopolies to some businesses, heavily taxing imports. Governments used to control the economy a lot for their own benefit, right? Physiocrats believed that if you stopped messing with the economy, let nature rule it, then it would prosper. In other words, the free supply and demand of labor and prices, and businesses that wouldn't make it just will go out of business, and those that will flourish can flourish freely without your intervention. In other words, they're saying leave the economy alone. Government shouldn't be messing in it at all. and the most lucrative businesses will rise to the top and the others will go extinct, just as in nature, right? Let nature do it. If you fix prices and wages, if you try and tamper with agriculture or trade, you will end up hurting the overall production of wealth, okay? So this is free trade, okay? What's in French called laissez-faire. Let it go, let it happen, okay? Let it do, whatever. And I think this is why all sorts of investors from all over the place are suddenly allowed to get into cognac, because they don't want to control the number of people. So you can literally walk into the region and set up a business if you have money. Both the growing end, the marketing, the distribution, everything. You can just walk in. It's not a tightly controlled business, because they want the competition. They think this is a good thing. Okay? They also, remember, there's still very low taxes because they want to encourage investment. They think if more of this stuff gets sold, we're going to be richer, right? And of course, cultivating this image of exclusivity by maintaining the high prices, which they can do because the government is not going to fix the prices anymore. They're not going to say you can only charge this amount for your product because we want everyone to be able to buy it so they don't riot. Now they're saying, do whatever you want, charge whatever you want. It's up to you. It's your product. So you can get much more per bottle, and they convince people around the world that the junk you're drinking, the rot gut gin especially, is really only for the poor. They're the ones who buy this by the mug, and it's garbage. It doesn't taste very good. You have to add stuff to it so it's palatable. Rum is, of course, also swill. It's made in the Caribbean, and it's made out of leftovers from sugar production. But if you want the best, you need something that comes directly from the soil, to the grape, to a kind of wine, to the distilled clear liquid, to the oak, to the aging and blending, and then shipped to you. And there's nothing, inferior about it. There's no stage of the whole process. So you should spend a whole lot on cognac because it's as good as it can get. And in succeeding centuries, this image never disappeared. Okay, it's forged in the 18th century. By the 19th century, the image of cognac is the same. Especially manufacturers Napoleon loved cognac, so there's a brand of Napoleon Brandy. I'm not sure how or why they do that, or whether even Napoleon, drank a lot. But his prime minister Talleyrand definitely did. But in any case, the industry grew, managed to maintain this air of exclusivity. And eventually, when they got the appellation saying only this little region can produce it, and we're going to control how it's made and the terms of production, it means that here's the point I'm making. There is no cheap knockoff cognac. Doesn't exist. And if you really don't have a whole lot of money, you can buy the lesser grades, but that's controlled by law. There's no fake stuff. Okay. And the grades, of course, regulated by the industry itself. So this is about the only spirit we're going to talk about that remains expensive, remains exclusive, and is entirely an exported luxury good. Now, this has been a blessing and also indirectly a curse. Now, let me explain this. In 1911, Artemus Ward wrote this. It is interesting to note that though cognac is so distinctively a French product, comparatively little of it is consumed in France, the bulk being exported to the English-speaking countries. In the offices of the largest cognac firms, nearly 95% of correspondence is conducted in the English language. So what that means is the cognac business is going to be very much dependent on fluctuations in the external markets, right? If the English decide to buy a little less, or the Americans, the cognac companies will have lesser revenue that year, right? In poor economic times, unlike other spirits, people will buy less cognac because it's the higher end of their price. If you say, of all these luxuries, now that we have a little less money to spend, what do we cut off? Well, cognac is the first to go. It's the expensive alcohol you'll buy cheaper, right? It's always the first luxury to go, because especially, and I think this is very important, is that when there are bad economic times, flaunting your wealth seems a little distasteful, right? It's like kind of everyone is down and out, and you're serving $1,000 glass of cognac. It seems like really unpleasant. Okay, or of course you just can't afford it, right? So on the other hand, in boom economies, when there are people with a lot of money who want to show off their wealth, or nouveau riche especially, because they have to prove to other people that they're worthy of being in their company, it's an ideal way to show your status, right? It's like, the people who buy a lot of tasteless, flashy jewelry, really expensive cars, a mansion. They drink cognac because it's a way of telling everyone, I can afford the most expensive crap in the world. And I think it's the only way anyone can really explain why the Chinese, in this incredible boom economy of the past decade, started drinking cognac. in great, it started really in Hong Kong, but Singapore, and now cognac is a really, really fashionable drink. In China, I hate to tell you, but I've seen it happen. They will put ice in it, which is a no-no. Unlike whiskey, which can take an ice cube, or bourbon, you do not do anything to cognac. Definitely don't water it down. But they also put soda in it. I've seen Coca-Cola go into expensive cognac. It's just unbelievable. And I am told also that another reason for this fixation on cognac is Mao Zedong, during the Great Leap Forward, decided that to get rid of the influence of the West, he would focus on rustic drinks that were made from local ingredients, from sorghum and from grain, in order to kind of just, get people to consume what's local. In fact, the Red Stars, this soju that you can find in, I should put on my Red Army hat while I'm talking about now. There's a brand called Red Star, which is the same star, which is it's really, really cheap stuff. Sells for about $1 in the airport for a bottle. But in any case, you can the association with these clear distilled drinks that are local is that once that communist regime loosened up, people said, well, now we can afford things from the West. The West seemed modern and advanced, and economic, liberalization meant drink cognac, drink wine. Wine and cognac are the drinks of choice in China, and I think for very good reason, because, they're associated with modernity, right? And I think this very same line of reasoning will explain why cognac is the drink of choice in hip-hop and rapster culture. It's out of nowhere, right? It makes no sense culturally. It's just that this is an expensive drink, basically consumed because no one else can afford it. So I want you to, in class, actually we'll listen to some of these tunes, but think of Busta Rhymes, think of P. Diddy, the rap song Pass the Courvoisier, that's 2001. I think that kind of starts the whole trend, but there are dozens of different versions, and literally dozens of rap songs that mention cognac in some fashion. Sometimes they refer to the brand, sometimes they will just say yak, which means cognac, of course, and sometimes these sometimes the houses themselves will hire rapsters as spokesmen. Snoop Dogg did commercials for Landy, T.I. did for Remy's, so they're not, the houses are not unaware that this has happened. So let's think of a handful of tunes. Nas is Coming, that's Nas featuring Dr. Dre. I'll read you a couple of lyrics. Jeep full of chicks, pull up beside, have a listen y'all, Nas y'all. Fly gangsta, wavy hair, teeth chipped in. My shit bump in the courtroom drunk. Link's trunk, Rocky bracelet, cognac Colonel, never chase it. Okay, so it's like just littered through rap lyrics, which obviously I can't do, so I'm not gonna even try it. But gosh, let's see. Gangsta lean, this is the clips. Just the way she kissed me. Hold her with the index and thumb tipsy. Ma, I'm so trippy. Hard to hold back. Scent so sweet. Got the cognac and honey rap. And then Snoop Dogg, my side. This is Jeezy up, hose down. I don't even know what this means, but in any case, my side is I mob the beach on a mission and I'm fishing for my DJ Warren G. Now I look for the bud sack and see where my love's at on the lake where the dove's at. Cognac is the drink that's drank by G's. So I'll leave it to you. Okay, you understand. Let's talk about one other drink though while we're at it. There's Armagnac. Okay, Armagnac is a brandy that's made just in Gascony to the south. It's made differently than cognac. It's actually made in column stills. It's a little less smooth, it's a little less expensive, but it has more guts than cognac, and I'll try and explain what I mean by that. It's distilled once. They don't bother with the fanciful double distilling. You get a lot more flavor out of the grapes that way. The alcohol percentage is only about a 50%, so it doesn't have to be watered down later either. It doesn't have to be colored the way cheap American brandy would be. But Armagnac houses tend to be, well, I'll use the term, they're smaller, definitely, than big cognac houses. They tend to be more artisanal. So the assumption is that the distiller can pay a lot more attention to the quality of the product, and it can be funky and weird and interesting in a way that cognac has to be blended and be the same, because you spend $200 on a bottle, you want it to be as good as it's going to get. Armagnac is, $40, $50. You can splurge on it, and it might get one that you don't really like that much, because some of them are a little weird. But Armagnac Armagnac went through a kind of, this is a long time ago, must be 15, 20 years ago, went through a weird little renaissance for people who said, I'm not paying so much for cognac, and turned to Armagnac. And you can still find bottles of it. I mean, most good liquor stores will have a couple of bottles. There is also brandy made elsewhere, I have to mention. There is Spanish brandy, like Brandy de Jerez, which can be very fine. It's just like a sherry that's been distilled. That can be really nice. There's also brandy in Mexico. You've probably seen the brand El Presidente, and not strangely, but it's a cousin of the Spanish brandy, which has been done since the late Middle Ages, right, folks? I mean, really, if you think about the early distilling people like Raymond Lull, right? American brandy is a different creature. It tends to be much sweeter. It can be made with any kind of grapes, so you're going to buy the cheapest grapes that are out there in the market. Usually, I would say the vast majority of grapes that go into American brandy are grown within 30 or 40 miles of where I'm sitting right now. There's Central Valley grapes that have a lot of sugar. We get the intense heat. They are cheap and in bulk, so of course, if you don't put them into jug wine, they go into brandy. So Corbel, Ian J. Gallo, which is right down in Modesto, Christian Brothers, Paul Masson, and as I've suggested, they're bad. They have almost no relation to brandy, and they miss, I think, what is the real allure of brandy is they're cheap. So if you ever see a brandy mixer, meaning that like an old-fashioned sometimes, or the original Sazerac, and you want to play around with mixing brandy into a drink, these are the ones to do it with, right? Because they're sweeter and they'll stand up to pretty much anything you throw at them. You would not mix real cognac. Even the VS is fine. So, and these will sell for about $10 for VS, or for a whole bottle. It's cheap. So was also once a large flourishing brandy industry in the Middle East, strangely. Well, especially Georgia, Armenia, the Caucasus. These places were once part of the Russian Empire, remember, and they could grow intense grapes. They once supplied the czars with brandy. So they have a long history there. There's also a company in Greece, surprisingly, that once really gave real cognac a run for the money. This is Metaxa, which is to my mind is rather too sweet, but it's a really decent, interesting brandy. If you want to try one, most good liquor stores will carry it. The company goes all the way back to 1888, and what makes it different from other brandies is that Muscat wine is added, so it has this kind of herbal aroma that's really strange and alluring. It's very sweet, very floral. As an after-dinner drink, it's delightful, and it's affordable, which I think is important. And even though they have a couple of super-aged versions, but the standard Metaxa brandy is it's kind of nice. So lastly, let me talk about eau de vie. Now, these are not These are not, they're called brandy, but they're technically distilled from fruit. There can be a grape eau de vie, of course, but these are things that are lumped into the same category just because they're the same technology. Okay? They're generally not aged, they're clear, but they're distilled usually once, so they will taste like the fruit they're distilled from. And they can be extraordinarily sophisticated. I have to say, when I'm in Germany, if you go and look for a schnapps or an eau de vie that's made of fruit, they do such a magnificent job. The trip that I was just on, I went into a little store that just sold, gosh, blackberries and bilberries and raspberries and strawberry, and they just distilled everything from the fruit itself. This is the key to the whole thing, so that like that flavor just comes through. And Kirschwasser, um, um, pear brandy. I mean, you could do anything basically out of it. Um, if it comes from, and the French do this too, I should mention, not just Germany. Um, the point is that Germans can grow fruit in places that they can't grow grapes, so this kind of schnapps uh, proliferated. In France, the one that's, I think, the French favorite really is called framboise, which means raspberries. Really, really beautiful stuff. In Germany, the best is Kirschwasser, which means cherry water, made of sour Morelos cherries. So it has a kind of bitterness and aroma that comes from actually the pits that are crushed in the whole process. It is fabulous in cooking too. If you make a fondue, a splash of Kirschwasser, absolutely essential. It goes into Kirschtorte. It's perfect with chocolate, absolutely magnificent. Poire Guillaume, which is a really interesting thing, that means pear Williams. They take the buds of the pear tree as the fruit after the flower is pollinated. They put a bottle on the around it, and then they tie it up to the branch so that the pear actually grows inside of a bottle. And then they fill it with pear brandy and close it. So it's magnificent. I don't know exactly how you get the pear out at the end, but because it's a full-grown pear inside the bottle, which is very cool. And then there's other things. Distilled from plums, you'll find slivovitz throughout Eastern Europe. Hungary, Yugoslavia, Poland makes it too. And it's interestingly a drink that you can drink on Passover because it has no grain in it. So anyway, that's one of the reasons it's flourished. So I encourage you, if you can, to be open-minded about brandy. It's a lesser drink among all those sold in the U.S. Because it's not a mixer, and because the good stuff is really expensive, and the cheap stuff, use for cooking. Use it for flambeing your dish, or mixing into a cocktail. But in any case, I don't know what's next, but I'll see you next week.